I'm so glad to be joined today on Bad Faith Podcast by Lindsey Boylan, who was the first woman to come forward with sexual harassment allegations against Andrew Cuomo. Welcome to Bad Faith Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. I felt it was really important to talk to you in the days leading up to the New York mayoral primary election, precisely because there has been a sort of erasure of exactly who Cuomo is and the disgraced manner in which he left office. And while there are often sort of allusions to or nods to the fact that he is left office in disgrace, the fact that he had these sexual harassment allegations, the nursing home scandal, it almost feels like those of us who were around at that time and remember don't feel it's necessary to get into detail about what actually happened because we all know the story. But I'm very conscious of the fact that a lot happens over the course of the years. There are newer viewers and people who are newer to politics and younger folks who don't actually know the details of what happened. So I wanted to have you on and give you an opportunity to really provide context for why it's so egregious that so many people in Democratic Party leadership, including most recently, as of today, Jim Clyburn, have come forward endorsing Cuomo.
It's really a horror show. I liken it to Halloween, the horror series where the bad guy just keeps coming back and, you can't quite get away from it. I don't feel like New York can quite get away from Andrew Cuomo. And I agree with you. I think there are so many policy mistakes he's made and it seemed like it was ubiquitous that everyone understood what a bad guy he was, his sexual harassment. It was found to be truthful by three different investigative bodies, from the Attorney General's report, the State Assembly report, to Biden's DOJ, all said he did these things. But some people are saying either we need our own bad guy or all of these women are liars, which I'm not a liar. Biden's Department of Justice didn't think I was a liar. He didn't think the DOJ didn't think the other dozen or so women who came forward weren't liars. The investigation, the Attorney General's report, interviewed almost 200 people, deposed dozens, including myself, legally, reviewed hundreds of thousands of documents, including, tens of thousands of pieces of evidence that Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed, groped, and created a toxic work environment for women, for the most part, who are half my age. So keep in mind, for the folks watching it now or listening, I'm the grandma of the group. Most of the women are about, half my age, maybe around the age of his daughters. And he was sexually harassing them, asking if they would have sex and be in a relationship with an older man, using innuendo to make them uncomfortable as their boss, and not just their boss, but the boss of the entire state of New York government, probably the most powerful governor in the country at the time. Just a really disgusting man who didn't even take his own sexual harassment training that he put into place in the state. Just really grotesque and an abuser of power. Some people don't care about what happens to women, but they should absolutely care about the fact that this is really just another manifestation of abuse of power.
You mentioned your relative age compared to some of the other people he harassed. Do you think that's part of why you were more willing to come forward before the rest?
I think it's definitely why I felt the need to. So I originally, I talked about it being a toxic place to work on Twitter over the years. And then at one point, someone was, it's one of those, ubiquitous questions that someone says, what's the worst job you've ever had? And I said it was working for Andrew Cuomo, toxic work environment. But I didn't say anything about sexual harassment. And Charlotte Bennett reached out to me on DM and said, thank you for speaking the truth. I was sexually harassed. And she explained how. And I knew she was telling the truth because it mirrored my own experience. And I felt, frankly, like crap because I'm a lot older than her. And I came before her and I didn't do anything about it, right? I didn't feel like I could, but still the fact that I didn't do something about it meant that she was sexually harassed because I didn't find a way to end it. And so I think if there's a relative piece about age, I have a tremendous amount of privilege. Let's just say it. I am at a place in my life where I have a good attorney. I've run for office. I have a platform. I'm comfortable to a greater extent in my life than I was when I was in their 20s. I have tremendous privilege. I'm a white woman who has, a whole host of backing, platforms that have helped me in my life. I should use that, right? I should use that somehow. And I don't think I would have been at a place in my life to speak up about it in my early 20s. I think it took me being
Yeah.
maybe a mom, maybe an aunt to kids or girls who are around the same age as women he was sexually harassing.
Yeah. So Lindsay, set the stage for us. What did happen to you?
So I worked for the state government for around, a little over 3 years, and I love the work. I'm an urban planner by background. I love public parks. I love public spaces. I'm really interested in it. And so this was a dream job in a lot of ways, being uplifted ultimately to being a secretary for economic development for the housing for the state of New York. So overseeing all business and housing issues, things I really care about. And half of that job was really great, getting to do the state's recovery work that Cuomo takes credit for in Puerto Rico, helping to pass
Hmm.
paid leave and $50 minimum wage by courting the business community. The other half of that job was terrible because I would walk into his office and I could be asked about my marriage, my sex life. I could be asked on a plane when I'm trying to brief him about topics from the governor on the state plane with the state trooper behind me if I want to play strip poker. I can be
Mm.
walking out of the office to go prep for a major event in Rochester. And at one point, I'm walking by him and he kisses me on the lips. And this was a consistent pattern. I could be doing meaningful work, really hard work. And then in the middle of it, have him suggest that I look like his ex-girlfriend. These types of things were happening consistently. And I think one of the saddest things that happened to me and to too many women is you think I'm smart and I'm tough. I can get through anything. I can get through this because my goal is to do something with my life, to make myself better and more powerful than the women who came before me in my family, for example. My mom had my sister at 16 and was constantly facing sexual harassment and assault in
Mm.
her life as a young woman.
Mm.
But so I didn't feel like I felt like it was a challenge to overcome, not something that I could stop. And so it was just something that could happen on any given day. And it usually did, mixed in with substantive work that I was expected to do and perform at a very high level. Now, in some ways, that was very different than some of the other women because some were maybe their first job out of college. So
Mm.
they were working for, in some cases, I read in parts of the report, they were working for someone and they were actually picked from working for someone else because he liked how they looked. In my case, he had his assistant
Wow.
tell me that I looked like his ex-girlfriend, but a more attractive, younger version of his ex-girlfriend. He was not secretive about this. He was very blatant about it. He used his staff, his female staff, to really trap women that he found attractive in his, toxic work environment. And this went on in increasing, repetition the closer I worked for him over the years.
These details are coming back to me now, and it really, I'm like, I'm speechless.
Yeah.
That I remember now how explicit it was.
Yeah.
I think your
And
point.
we have a lot of us have proof
Yeah.
and emails, contemporaneous proof, things we shared with people in our lives. This was documented very significantly. I think, he was the most powerful man in the state. If they could have gotten around it and not kind of taken his firestorm by telling the truth, they would have. But they couldn't because it all happened and there was so much proof.
So walk me through what happened when you came forward and when others started to come forward, what kind of response there was from Cuomo, what kind of retaliation?
I mean, he immediately started, calling me crazy, saying I was a bad person, trying to get the Time's Up group leadership not to support me, which they didn't. That was revealed later that he did all of these things and he had people smear me. He went and had his surrogates, like Charlie King, call my campaign staff and try to threaten them not to work for me anymore. I mean, he did all kinds of things to basically get people to be afraid to work with me, to even talk to me. And it worked. I was running for office at that point. For all intents and purposes, my campaign was over at that point. I mean, what kind of campaign do you have when you're challenging the most powerful man in your state, in your party?
Mm. Mm.
And that was fine. It wasn't fine, but it was important to me to come forward and stand my ground I didn't get out of the race, but I completely stopped fundraising for months. I didn't do any of that stuff. For all intents and purposes, my life was destroyed for a year. When he resigned, there was this sense that, people like, oh, I was with you all along, and I hadn't heard from them. But
Mm,
it is what it is. He resigned. He said he took some culpability or accepted some culpability for his actions. And then he's proceeded to spend the next many years harassing us all in court. He's spent over $60 million in taxpayer funds in many lawsuits that he has outstanding against him, including 2 civil lawsuits from women he sexually harassed. And even though I decided not to sue him because I didn't want that monster in my life anymore, I have
mm.
been dragged into litigation with these 2 cases, and he's trying to harass me legally in what one of the judges in the case calls scorched earth tactics. So I've had to pay, and again, this is where my privilege comes in. I'm able to do this, but I've had to pay millions of dollars in legal fees that I'm covering
Oh
just
my
to fight
God.
back against his attacks. And it's not just me. So, like my junior campaign staff who worked for me, he's subpoenaed them, to try and I don't even know what he was trying to do. Kids who were in college at the time they worked for me just to harass them. One of whom happens to be a domestic abuse survivor, and Andrew Cuomo's coming after her, my junior staffer who was in college at the time, just to harass her legally because she's somehow tangentially connected to me. It's really sickening, all of this stuff. And he's using all of these tactics. He's using taxpayer money. And that's what I like to keep in mind. I mean, it's a great example of how his abuse of all of us is really his abuse of power, because he's using taxpayer money to silence all of us. And I think, if I could be candid, what he expected to have happen has not, in that he thought he would weaponize the legal system so much that I would shut up right now, that I wouldn't be talking to you.
Mm.
And that's just not acceptable. That's not how I was going to use my privilege or my voice. And that's not how any of us are. I mean, I'm getting to talk to you because you think that's BS. We all think that's BS, and it's not good enough.
And see, that's incredibly courageous. I mean, I think that there might be people who look at the situation and say, well, you have the courage to speak up once or
Yeah.
initially, and
Yeah.
it's one or done. But I think what you're demonstrating is that powerful people like Cuomo, who are not just powerful because they're wealthy, but because they have all of this institutional power,
Oh,
because
yeah.
they have the power to call up a women's rights organization like Time's Up and try to
Yes.
coerce them to speak on his behalf or to speak out against you. I mean, unsuccessfully in this regard, but it would not have been the first time a sort of establishment aligned women's organization took a political position that was antithetical to the interests of women because it was
Kirsten
supporting the
Gillibrand.
interests of a political
Kirsten
case in
Gillibrand.
point.
Someone who's built her life supposedly supporting survivors, and is saying, it's up to the voters to decide. I think it's truly disgusting. And, people say as you get older, some people get more conservative. I get way more liberal and way more angry about the system because
Yeah.
I am so privileged, and I get that. And if I did not have every ounce of privilege that I have, it would have already destroyed me, I think. And so that's why I share this, because it's not fair. It's not fair that it takes everything that I have to fight against a monster. Like, I mean, you see what Harvey Weinstein has done to these women. You see what Epstein did to all of these women. You see what all of these abusive men do to silence women, or victims, whatever, men and women, and silence very powerful people. I think, to the Gillibrand piece, and even the head of Time's Up, he's been able to get people afraid who are very powerful. If you can make powerful people afraid of you, you can do anything. And that is very scary. And that is where I think there's so much in common with Trump. I think it
Yeah.
isn't just kind of a liberal rallying cry. They're both courting fascism because they make you afraid to speak up. And we cannot be afraid to speak up.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that Trump comes up in this conversation is the obvious parallels between Trump and this base that liberals seem confused as to, how could they possibly support a man who has all of these credible sexual assault allegations against him,
Yes.
when at the same time they turn around and repeatedly support candidates who are similarly situated. And I would go back to even at the beginning of Joe Biden's announcement, there were 8 women who came forward who said that there were these
Yes.
allegations of sexual harassment from him. At the time, Kamala Harris, soon to be his VP, said that she believed those women. And whatever happened, I wasn't there, and those cases I think weren't tracked down and kind of litigated by the press or by any legal institutions in the way that should have happened at the time. But whatever you think actually happened in those cases, I think the real responsibility was to have some consistency with the movement that Democrats claimed to want to support with the Me
Yes.
Too movement. And the kind of undermining of credibility of the interests of women
Yes.
from the Democratic Party, who really has built its sort of name on the idea that it protects historically marginalized groups, has done an enormous damage. And
It's
including that
heartbreaking.
it has no credibility to be upset with someone like Donald Trump. You can't exactly say, oh, how horrible, he could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and his base would still vote for him, when the
Yes.
Democratic Party will put forward a candidate, multiple candidates in various scenarios that have had all these credible allegations against them, even call for them to resign at one time in
Yes.
history, and then flip-flop and turn around and say, never mind, actually anything to beat the socialists.
And now what they're trying to do, it's truly disgusting. And now what they're trying to do, they're trying to have their cake and eat it both ways by saying, not just this is more important than hiring a good guy. They're actually now changing tactics to call us all liars. So Assemblyman Bichat just went on Brian Lehrer this morning and said, well, I'm not sure if it's true. You know, people lie sometimes.
So do you
At a
think,
criminal level.
as an Albany serving woman, that all 11 of your colleagues, 11, who the report found to be credible in their accusations, were all those women making up their stories?
Well, we don't know. Okay, we don't know. I will tell you that me as a Black woman, I know that there were times where my story was always dismissed. And there were times where I've known people who would make up stories. Okay. And so we have to be really, really very careful. You had some women, I believe, that were untruthful.
She was one of the people who called for his resignation. And
Incredible.
it's
Was there
incredible.
pushback?
Yeah, there was a ton of pushback. I mean, are you saying all like this dozen or so women lied? Are you saying the Department of Justice lied? Are you saying the Assembly report lied? Are you saying the Attorney General lied? And she's trying to cloak herself in her own experience. You know, oftentimes people say, well, I'm a survivor. And, you know, so I know this is difficult, but essentially the answer has to be maybe these women lied. And I think that's truly disgusting because it used to be maybe we need our bully, right? He's not a good guy, but we need him for this reason. Now they're trying to say, because they realize how duplicitous that looks, no, these women lied. And that is even worse in some ways because it's trying to use the tactic of manufactured consent and lie about what actually happened and say this is a totally different reality. And it's truly disgusting. And you either have to be evil or stupid to say it. And I would really wish more people were stupid because that's really evil to suggest that, particularly how damaging it is to so many survivors and to so many women in the workplace. On some level, maybe not in this way and not in this extent, but most women have the experience of being sexually harassed. I've been sexually harassed my whole career. Never was it this pervasive. Never was it this abusive. Never was the entire environment so toxic and it being such a serial process with women before and after me. And that's why I spoke up. But, you know, I waitressed, all through my youth. And some places are really respectful. Some places are not. And, you know, I've had people reach into my ass pocket, you know, and touch my butt through, you know, like all kinds of crazy sexual harassment. And this was, for me, so beyond the pale. And it was coming from someone whose job it is to protect people and the most vulnerable.
Yeah, that's such an important point. I also want to validate, Lindsey. Like, I remember when I was a younger woman, I thought when I was like heading into big law, graduating from law school, that the kind of barriers that I was going to face at the law firm were going to be racial in nature. That's kind of what I was stressed about and anticipated and was guarded against. And then I remember how surprised I was when my summer first summer at the firm, I had all of my negative experiences revolve around gender. And I confess that as a younger woman, you hear about sexual harassment, you like understand it conceptually, but I think there was still, until it happened to me, a part of my brain that was like, well, I'll just tell them to stop.
Yeah.
And, I'll just assert myself and they'll get in trouble because they're not supposed to do that. And they'll get nipped in the bud. And then I remember the way it actually played out. What I realized was, one, the ramifications of being the squeaky wheel. You're weighing that,
huge,
especially in the summer associate context. Like you're trying to get a job, right?
Yes.
You don't want to be so difficult that they don't hire you. So that's one dynamic at play. And then additionally, the reality that the person that you are supposed to be reporting up to can be involved with the harassment.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So my situation was like, there was sometimes, it was, the summer. And so they would have fun events for us ostensibly as a summer class.
Yes.
And one day, one of the partners was like, let's have a late lunch. So basically you can have a drinking lunch and then everybody goes home. So we had like a 3 p.m. lunch. And so we're here at some like German beer bratwurst kind of a joint. My summer class happened to have only 3 women in it and I think 13 men.
It's not crazy.
The previous year had been the number skewed in the other way. So I think they were trying to balance it out or whatever. But the point is it happened to be that there were only 3 women and one of them rarely came out with us because she was pregnant, understandably. Yeah. So it was often I was the only female summer associate in the mix. And I had been telling a friend of mine at the firm, another associate, that one of my friends from law school who happened to be male was coming to visit me in New York. It wasn't romantic, but he was going to be staying with me. And someone overheard and they started joking about, ooh, Briahna's going to have a lover come. Is she going to give him head? This is at a lunch with a partner sitting in there at the table of like, let's say 12 of us or so. And I remember being like, how is this happening? I think I'm like kind of joking and trying to put it down and like trying to play it off and be like, you're being an idiot, like be quiet. But there's just like this rising chorus of LOL, Briahna's going to give this guy, like it was insane. And it was in that moment, like there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can say. There's no amount of being like a guy's girl. There's no amount of being like, I can take a joke. There's no amount of being, no, actually quit it. I'm serious. Like everything I said was dismissed and escalated until I was like at the point of tears. I had never experienced anything like that before. And then subsequently making the decision to whether or not I'm going to say anything. And I was not planning on it. I consulted with someone in my life who has been in an HR capacity. And she was like, well, I love you.
HR is not your friend.
HR is not your friend. And I would maybe withhold saying anything at least until you have a firm offer. And it ended up getting reported by another woman who heard about it through the grapevine, who was already an associate at the law firm, an older woman.
Good for her.
And the partner involved was not there when I came back permanently to the firm. That being said, for whatever reason, it was never told to me why, but he was no longer working there.
He probably did that a lot. He probably did it a lot.
Yeah, I feel the need to tell the story because I know that there are people who are kind of like disillusioned with the Me Too movement, who feel like, it was weaponized in the ways that it was weaponized and not treated credibly and seriously by the Democratic Party for all the reasons we're talking about, and who I think might also then start to dismiss the idea of sexual harassment altogether.
Yes.
And who haven't experienced it because, they're men or because they haven't exactly worked in that sort of environment or they're too young to have like graduated into the real world. But I just wanted to affirm that this happens with such regularity to people who are not bringing it upon themselves.
No.
And who are not like trying to cause trouble and who are not trying to weaponize it and who actually have the opposite incentive to not say anything at all.
And mostly don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that because that is exactly what happens. And it's this, if you're smart and you have a long-term goal that's probably very altruistic, or you have this long-term goal for your life, the smart answer is not to say anything. Yeah. And that is a terrible reality that needs to change. And I hope it is changing, but the research bears out most do not say anything because there are so many barriers to saying something. And it typically takes someone who has some privilege, like this other, associate who did something a little older. But there's no amount of maneuvering that gets you out of these experiences of being sexually harassed. And that is what is so wrong about it. There is not an opt-out button. And it is also not something that we should have to expect. I think one thing that I do hear sometimes is, it happened to me, so it's going to happen to you too. Well, what is the point of society if we're going to continue to fall victim to the same problems? I don't want my kid to suffer through what I did. And I hope that the ways in which I stand up in the world, and, all of us do, makes it better for them. Why on earth would I want my kid to go through these same things that in many ways that were very, very destabilizing in my life? Now we all find our path and find meaning to it, but incredibly destabilizing. I wanted nothing more than to do that job, and to do serious, meaningful work and be taken seriously, and to not be taken seriously, but still expected to do serious work was a real mindfuck, constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think it means if Cuomo wins for both sort of New York State politics, New York City, and for the Democratic Party as a whole, given that he's accruing these endorsements from people like Clyburn and Gillibrand?
Yeah. I think it's deeply, I think for a long time I've thought, and, I think you and I share some of these same views, reiterated them over the years. There's some deep corruption in the party. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I envision myself being a Democrat, but for us to have $20 million injected into a campaign super PAC that doesn't have the same rules in supposedly public matching fund race is corrupt. To have people donating to that PAC be people who will have business before business before the city, who've already had business before the city, who are real estate developers who will benefit greatly financially from an Andrew Cuomo administration giving him millions of dollars, is corrupt. Having unions that are supposed to represent the safety and the interest of their membership not even holding open votes for the candidates, and forcing them to do union dues by showing up at various campaign events for Cuomo is corrupt. And it's a corruption of our union, our tremendous union history in this country. So money, corruption of leadership in these incredibly important labor institutions. It's corrupt that he can evade the press entirely and evade answering these questions, which he has done. It's everything that we speak out against Trump and how dangerous it is for our democracy. The same is true within our party. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life building in a party that is going to do that. I think you're seeing that at a certain level. The rapid decline in donations to the DNC. There was just a story on it yesterday. They can barely, maybe stay afloat with their work if they can't get donations back. What is inspiring about a group of people who are keeping a gerontocracy in play? And now I'm not against having all different ages, but one that's entirely run by people to keep out others just because they've been in power is wrong. And all of these things are playing out here. And I think the folks who in the media are really smart about it are talking about this, are saying this is a battle for the future of the party. And it's going to be a real bad future if the future looks like Andrew Cuomo. What kind of future it is with him?
It really is. I understand that people feel differently about this. And, I took years to come to my position, and other people are at other points on their journey. But I do sort of feel like we're all on a trajectory of how much does the Democratic Party have to disappoint you or disgust you before you leave. Yeah. What's your personal red line? And there are many people.
I'm feeling a lot of those red lines. Feeling a lot of those red lines.
Then there are people who would have jumped off, at the point that the sexual harassment scandal broke.
Yeah.
There are people whose red line was Gaza. There are people
Yeah,
whose
it's
red line
disgusting.
was, 30, 50 years ago, whatever it was.
Yes.
But I do feel like we're all sort of edging to this place. And Cuomo is such an interesting example of what I tried to get across on this show, which is the extent to which the Democratic Party is not an opposition party,
No.
but is there to manufacture consent for the shared goals of the duopoly. And because Cuomo, I was reminded of all of the coverage that we were doing at The Intercept back in 2018 about Cuomo in the independent Democratic, the IDC, and the way that he was like rigging a Democratic state, like an overwhelmingly blue state, to ensure that these conservative political views had dominance.
Yes,
despite having these overwhelming majorities. Yeah, go ahead.
And to prevent truly good policy from occurring. Anything good and progressive that happened under him was done in spite of him.
Yeah.
He used the IDC as a way to prevent progressives from organizing for truly great policy making, whether we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about, housing, we're talking about anything. He used the conservatives in the state to prevent his own party, the really innovative leaders in his own party, from doing their jobs. And that's disgusting, but that's what he did.
Yeah, the levels. I was just talking to Ross Barkan about this, and we were sort of debating, is some of the stuff not sticking to him right now because it's just like too much stuff?
You do wonder. It's the shock and awe, I don't even know.
In that kind of Trumpian way, right? Like there's too many scandals, there's too many stories. Yeah. Do you feel like, from my perspective, Zoran in the debate laid in some really amazing clean punches against Cuomo. But I do wonder, do you have feelings about whether or not the sexual harassment scandal versus some of these other scandals should be sort of emphasized more or highlighted by, if not Zoran himself in his campaign, then other political groups in New York State who could be spinning behind anti-Cuomo ads, whether it's the Working Families Party or other kind of independent expenditures?
I think right now I want the money and the focus and every single moment of time we have left to be on whatever is going to coax some of those voters who might be swayed or might show up if they're not going to otherwise. And as I understand it, to some people, the sexual harassment matters, to other it doesn't. For communities that it doesn't matter, don't lead with it. It just because it's my personal trauma and pain and fight, A, doesn't mean it's the only one I care about, or B, doesn't mean that matters more than getting the outcome we need. How many more vulnerable women and people are going to suffer if this man gets back in office? So for me, I am all about, if you go to this meeting and it doesn't it's not going to resonate if you talk about workplace harassment, don't bring it up. Bring up the Moreland Commission, all of the corruption that he had. Bring up the nursing home scandal where he made $5 million off of this book deal where he lied about his successes when in fact thousands of people died in nursing homes because of his policymaking, and that he lied about that too. If that's what works in certain communities because it's compelling to people, bring that up. I am completely about what is the strategy that is going to prevent this monster from getting back to power. And to the extent that my speaking up, I will, as you may have seen, I'm doing and saying everything I can to reiterate the points that I know best and communicate best about his abuse of power. And to the extent that Zoran or Brad and others can build off of that and use that, I am very happy. And to the extent that they need to lean into other areas of his abuses of power and his corruption and his stupidity, I am very happy for them to do that. I have the end goal in mind, which is why I was sitting on the ground in a park getting eaten alive by these bugs because I know I got to talk to you, and it's so important that I know I got to go do some more flyering. We've got to win this. And so if it means talking about my own pain or trauma every day, then we do that. If it means talking about his other abuses entirely and not that, do that. We need to beat this guy. It is not about me. It's about how bad he will be for all New Yorkers. And I'll do my piece. And if my piece is useful to others, pick it up. I texted with Zoran and Brad and said, do what you need to do in that debate. If it's helpful, you bring this up. If you need to focus on other areas because you're trying to get new supporters to understand why you're the best leader, do that. And that's where I'm at right now.
Can I just ask as we wrap, like as you've been flyering, or I don't know if you've done any door knocking or canvassing, what has your experience been as you're at these doors talking to folks? What's your assessment of what issues are sort of motivating voters? Is it the negative campaigning, the don't vote for Cuomo because he's bad? Is it enthusiasm around the positive aspects of Zoran? Are there particular issues that seem to be resonating with people on one or both of sides of that axis?
I think it's two things. You cannot deny the excitement at the grassroots level for Zoran's campaign. There is just so much excitement, and I have not seen it in my career in the city of New York. And I want to validate that. There's a tremendous amount of excitement. People that I never would have imagined would be canvassing. And it feels good to be part of that community. There are a lot of people who it does really resonate to hear the most egregious examples of his abuse of power with women, like seeking out gynecological records of one of his victims who's half my age. That does really resonate as an example. Like, people need to have these granular examples of his abuse of power, or, how he lied to Congress about shaping the policy and changing the numbers of people who died in nursing homes. His mistakes do resonate with people, and they do remember it. But people are living their lives. They have so much going on. There's so much trauma in the world right now. What's going on in Gaza, whatever we're talking about, there is so much. And I'm not minimizing any of the things in this race, including my own experience, but people need to be reminded. And so when we have a chance to use the egregious examples, they work. And I think the anti-Cuomo, the Dream community, which is where I was, and going back to do some work on, don't rank evil Andrew for mayor, incredibly effective. And, people say, oh, why aren't we how do we raise money like Cuomo's Fix the City? We don't want to be owned in that way. Hey, I would love if we could get tons of money and funnel it into getting the truth out about this man. But the innovation that I've seen happen with Dream, with Zoran's campaign, with Brad Lander's campaign, some of the working together that I've never seen in my career. I've never had the chance to work across campaigns like this for a shared common goal. And that's been really inspiring. And, I am really hopeful. I'm going to fight every day until, the primary, and then until the general, because this will be a fight until the general, as we all well know, and I'm sure you and Ross discussed, because Cuomo will run in the general either way, and the Working Families Party will hopefully be, having a candidate either way. This is an exciting time to be part of what I view as the most important movement in the country. What's happening in New York is the fight that is happening across the country. We need to fight back against duopoly, as you said, from an oligarchy that is controlling both parties, that is funding manufactured consent. And I feel like I'm on, in at the ground level in New York in some ways. And that's been very exciting.
Well, you're quite literally on the ground as I've caught you in this park. I don't want to hold you.
I don't want to hold you for too much longer.
I don't want you to get eaten alive, and I want you to be able to continue your important work. But I really do appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Can you let people know where they can hear more from you and find you online and beyond?
I am on Twitter, Lindsey Boylan, Lindsey Boylan. I'm on Instagram, Lindsey Boylan NY, and I'm also on Blue Sky under my name. And I'm on there a lot, and I love to meet new friends in the fight. So please follow me, and hopefully I'll get to engage with you more. And thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Lindsey, thank you for your time. Thanks to all of you for tuning in to this bonus episode of Bad Faith Podcast. Remember, don't rank Cuomo. And as always, keep the faith.
Yeah.
Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.